the importance of eco-justice. And one of the things that is expected to come under Mr. Reagan's leadership is a community notification program when certain pollutants are released into the air, especially in those neighborhoods and in those places where communities are vulnerable. I'm bringing this to your attention because it's important to know that this conversation that we're having today falls right in line with what is the direction that the country needs to go. And so for all of our wonderful students and community leaders that are tuned in today, please don't think that you aren't able to make a change or a difference. In Baltimore City, we are dealing with some very serious environmental challenges, but we also should appreciate the wins. And one of the big wins that I see is that there were students who were about changing from styrofoam over to paper. And so that ban on styrofoam containers, food containers, and other styrofoam pieces, that was a student-oriented movement that had led to that change. And so it just goes to show us that we need to have these conversations in schools. And most importantly, for all of the students that are tuned in today, just realize if you have a way to change or make the environment better, put your ideas down on paper, listen to what we have to, I'm not going to be speaking, but our wonderful panelists will have to say, and most importantly, get ready to make the decision to do something for your environment. So I thank everybody for tuning in, and I certainly thank all of our team. I want to thank the Dean of the Middle School, Mr. McNeil, and everyone that's joining us, and I look forward to the conversation this morning. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mr. Mohammed. We're really, really grateful for your collaboration. And thanks
Absolutely.
to all of you in the audience for joining us. We're super excited that you're here. As a predominantly white institution, it's our mission to keep examining our place and our role in our city, and strengthening our relationship with community partners throughout Baltimore is one part of that effort. We're super excited to hear from our panelists. First, we will ask each of our panelists to give a 2-minute introduction of the work that they and their organizations do. From there, we will move on to our discussion, and finally, we will have time for a Q&A. As you're listening, if you have any questions that you would like to be answered by one of our panelists, click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and type it into the chat. Our first panelist is Mr. Phil Krosky. Mr. Krosky is a co-chair of Mayor Brandon Scott's Transition Team for Environment and Sustainability and is the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of MD Energy Advisors. In 2013, Mr. Krosky was chosen as one of Baltimore Business Journal's. In 2018, he was named as one of the Daily Record's Most Admired CEO winners and was also selected to participate in the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee African American Emerging Leader Delegation to Israel. Mr. Krosky, could you please tell us about your work at MD Energy Advisors and with Mayor Scott's Transition Team for Environment and Sustainability?
Annalisa, thank you for your introduction today, and thank you to the Friends School for this opportunity. As Annalisa said, my name is Phil Krosky. I'm the CEO and co-founder of MD Energy Advisors, and we have a unique story. We started our company back in 2010, and with $10,000. So anything's possible for you students that are listening. We don't have necessarily had a background coming in energy, but we saw an opportunity. And our goal at MD Energy Advisors is really help people conserve energy within their buildings or within their homes. So we've been on the forefront of really helping residents reduce energy consumption, make their homes more efficient, use more energy efficient appliances, and also for our commercial clients as well, where we look at the entire building envelope, making that more efficient to reduce the carbon footprint. We also help with renewable projects as well. So we've done a few solar projects in and around the region for our clients as well. I'm honored to be on this panel and talk because I think there is a movement afoot in the country around two really major sectors, energy and technology. And I can't wait to have an additional conversation and discussion with the students today on how they will fit into this emerging landscape within these two various sectors of energy and technology. Again, I'm honored to be on the panel, and I see my other transition team members on the panel as well, so I'm looking forward to hearing from them as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to, I believe, Scott, I'll turn it over to you next.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Krosky. I'm Anna Kiefer, a sophomore here at Friends, and I'd like to welcome our next panelist, Jen Eosa. Ms. Eosa serves on Mayor Scott's transition team for environment and sustainability and is the executive director of Blue Water Baltimore. She has worked for 20 years on behalf of the environment in Maryland by serving nonprofit organizations and our state government. Before joining Blue Water Baltimore in 2017, she served as vice president and director of conservation programs at the Chesapeake Conservancy and as Director of Policy and Planning Research for the Maryland Department of Planning. Ms. Eosa, would you please tell us more about your work in Baltimore?
Sure. Thank you very much, Anna. And thank you to all the students and faculty members at Friends who are pulling this together. Like Phil, I'm really honored to be here. So I'm the executive director of Blue Water Baltimore, and we are a nonprofit organization focused on restoring the health of our waterways throughout the Baltimore region in Baltimore City and County. And our aim is to do that in a way that is protective of the environment, but also recognizes the need for communities to be at the forefront of those restoration activities. And so we spend a lot of our time on a couple of key issues. We work on the ground with community members and community leaders to implement on the ground solutions to pollution problems. And that could be everything from planting trees to engaging in pollution investigations when someone suspects that something is going on. We also do a lot of direct advocacy and policy work. And so I was really happy to hear Mr. Mohammed discuss the ban on expanded polystyrene food packaging, because he's absolutely right. That was a student-led approach to advocacy that literally changed the law in Baltimore City. And so we work with other organizations at both the city and the state level to do work like that. And then we are also what's called a waterkeeper organization. So we are part of the International Waterkeeper Association, and there are more than 300 waterkeepers around the country. And what that means to be a waterkeeper organization is that we try to be the eyes and ears of our local waterways. If there is a polluting industry, if there is a fish kill, if there is a problem in our watersheds, we work with communities, with agencies and government to fix those problems and to hold polluters accountable. And so, like Phil, I'm looking forward to the conversation with students today, because I think there are so many opportunities for students to be engaged in changing the climate in which we live and work in the Baltimore region. So I'll turn it back over to Anna.
Thank you so much, Ms. Eosa. I'm Elena Rusinoff. I'm a junior at Friends School. And our final panelist is Mr. Scott Goldman. Mr. Goldman also serves on Mayor Scott's transition team for environmental and sustainability. And he's the executive director of the 6th branch. The 6th branch is a veteran-led community service organization whose founders and volunteers believe that change can happen when you're involved in positive actions and something larger than yourself. They work in collaboration with the Darley Park, Broadway East, Johnson Square, and Oliver neighborhoods in Baltimore. Scott Goldman served military tours in Afghanistan and as a major and judge advocate for the U.S. Army. Mr. Goldman, can you please tell us more about your work in Baltimore?
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's great to see Phil and Jen again. And thank you to all our friends at Friends and beyond. So I'm executive director of the 6th branch. We are a veteran-led neighborhood organization. We were founded in 2010 by Baltimore area veterans who came home to the city and felt like they still had more to give. So even though they took their uniforms off, they founded what started as a community service club for veterans and has since grown into this neighborhood development nonprofit. So our main work, our main effort is transforming vacant lots and vacant spaces in partnership with neighborhoods, turning those lots into community green spaces. And we work currently steward about 18 acres of space in East Baltimore in the 4 neighborhoods you listed. And our, on a day-to-day basis, we're planting trees and removing old concrete and cleaning up and building parks and playgrounds. We manage 2 community farms, and it's sort of a wide effort of programming, all directed by the leaders in these neighborhoods. We love this city, and we've had a wonderful relationship too. It's great to be speaking with friends, because you all have volunteered with us many times, and I'm sure some of the students at our other partner schools today have volunteered with us. You know, we believe anyone can serve their country by serving their city, and that's near and dear to us, and it's just an honor to be here. So I will turn it back to you, and I'm excited for the next questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Goldman. Let's now begin the discussion section of the panel, which we'll spend about 20 minutes on. We'll talk about problems, hopes, and accountability. Our first question focuses on the problems that we're facing right now. The question is, what do you see as the greatest problems concerning the environment and environmental racism in Baltimore?
Or Jen, ladies first. I'll let you go first, Jen.
Thanks, Phil. So from the perspective of an organization that focuses on water, you know, we see one of the greatest sort of challenges, but also opportunities in the fact that Baltimore City is an old industrial city. We have more than 300 years worth of history as an industrial center, as a port, as a manufacturing city. And unfortunately, many of those historical industries left a legacy of pollution that is still with us today. I think it's also very important that folks understand that the siting and the distribution of those impacts has disproportionately impacted our Black and Latinx communities, more so than many of our white neighborhoods. And so there are legacies of toxic contamination, of poor land use decision-making, excessive pollution, and siting of polluting industries in areas that are predominantly African American and often lower income. And so we have a real opportunity to name that and to constructively work toward reversing that. In the age of climate change, I think we're exacerbating challenges by seeing more rainfall and more stormwater runoff, which provides, I think, the opportunity side of things, which I know is another question. So we're really focused on how our industrial legacy, how our legacy of land use decision making has led to disproportionate pollution impacts among our residents, past and present, and correcting that moving forward.
Yeah, and then I'll just piggyback on what Jen said. When you look at the Baltimore City in particular, and the areas that are impacted most by environmental concerns, those typically tend to be Black and African American communities. If you look in and around, say, the Bresco plant and the incinerator, those are areas that are primarily Black, and the land values are depressed because no one really wants to live near an incinerator. No one wants to live near landfills. And this is legacy. This is all things that we all inherited. Now, just because we inherit it doesn't mean that we can't make change. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to really do our part during this moment in history, this transformation moment in history, where we can help right some of the wrongs of the past. And I'm so happy to hear that the Friends School is really on the forefront of that, because I mean, there are a lot of environmental concerns in and around. If you look at any, predominantly Black community, you're gonna see environmental concerns everywhere. And just from my lens, from an energy standpoint, I look at environmental justice as energy affordability because, we all know what our rent is every month. That's pretty flat standard. We know what that's going to be. We even know what our car payment is going to be every month. But you really don't know what that utility bill is going to look like month over month. And that's a pain point for many of our communities. So, that's a long-winded way of me saying that I think environmental equity has to be a part of this conversation, and along with environmental justice. And from an energy standpoint, we got to do all we can to make sure that, lower income folks, Black and brown communities aren't paying upwards to 15% of their income in energy and utility costs, and how can we drive that down?
Yeah, and I'll add to that everyone in Baltimore deserves to be able to enjoy clean and safe green spaces. And in our work, sort of we deal with environmental justice on a very ground level view, because we're working on vacant lots, we're working in community green spaces, and I actually see this personally every day because I live in Canton on the 700 block of South Montford Avenue. I work on projects in Broadway East on the 700 block of North Montford Avenue. On my block, there's an alley behind my house. It's clean. Contractors don't come and dump mattresses and things there. There's a supermarket 2-3 blocks from my house I can walk to. There's most of the houses surrounding me are, probably all of them are occupied. On the 700 block of North Montford, just the difference in that S or that N, 14 blocks away, the mirror image of my house is a vacant building next to a vacant lot. Contractors who do rehabs in my neighborhood go and bring their trash and dump it in that alley. It is environmental injustice that is manifest in a very everyday level, whether you can go outside and see the trash on your street or not, whether when you call 311 people come and actually get it. I see that as we see that every day, and sort of the lens through which I understand most of it, and probably most of the problems I think you can understand Baltimore through, is the fact is this city had almost 1 million people in it in 1950 and has just under 600,000 now. And one of the primary drivers of that depopulation was racist policy, racist housing policy, education policy, economic policy. And the consequence of that is what we're dealing with today, all of us. And until we can make sure every neighborhood in Baltimore has access to safe, clean space around it, and gets the same, has the same sort of level of, of response and safety as I can feel here, I think that's what we're going to be running into.
Thank you all for your thoughtful answers to that question. So now moving into our second question, the theme is progress and looking towards the future. So what do you see as the greatest hopes, opportunities, and ideas for progress towards eco-justice in Baltimore?
I think just having this conversation right now is progress. I mean, I don't know if this conversation was being had when I was in high school. Now that was a long time ago. So, but I don't think this conversation was being had there. So I'm very optimistic about the future. I'm very optimistic, as Mr. Mohammed had mentioned earlier, about the new administration in Washington and their emphasis on climate change and environmental justice. I'm optimistic about our current city administration and leadership. The transition team in which Jen and Scott and I participated on, our recommendations will be made public next week. And I'm excited to hear kind of the public's reaction to some of our recommendations. So there's a lot to be encouraged about. There's a lot of things, there are a lot of challenges, but there's a lot to be encouraged by. And I am an optimistic person by nature. And I would say that the sky is the limit. And for, you folks that are younger than the 3 panelists here, I would say, you have a very bright future to impact climate change and really correct the environmental injustices that Scott alluded to earlier.
Yeah, I agree with what Phil just mentioned. I will also say that I feel very encouraged by some of the conversations that have been happening at multiple scales, both in the city, in the state, and now, you know, within the federal space, that are making real concrete connections between issues, environmental issues, and inequities that have often been seen as very separated issues. They're really not. I'm an ecologist by training, and so I look at the connections between things. And I think that, as Scott mentioned, the very race-driven land use policies, redlining, white flight to suburban counties, that has yielded disinvestment in a lot of our neighborhoods. And that disinvestment often shows up, simply enough, by no trees, no tree canopy in many Baltimore neighborhoods in East and West Baltimore. And so that means that we're seeing a lot more summertime heat. We're seeing a lot more flooding that are driven by climate change. And that flooding and that heat impacts health outcomes. We have higher rates of asthma and other respiratory incidents where we have hotter summertime temperatures, where we have low tree canopy. And so we're suddenly seeing opportunities for collaboration with hospitals and healthcare systems to plant trees in neighborhoods that don't have them, because those healthcare providers recognize that we're doing more than providing a tree in front of a home if we are looking at that from through a diversity, through an equity lens and through a justice lens, as well as an environmental and public health lens. So there are lots of opportunities for solutions to more than one problem if we continue to have these conversations and these collaborations to see what's possible instead of simply doing what we've done before.
Yeah, and what gives me some hope of progress is that, you know, when I was your age, which I can't, saying that makes me feel so old, but when I was most of everyone in this group's age, you know, the environment, environmentalism, social justice, all these things were, you know, I remember it as pretty abstract. You know, they were about the ozone layer over Antarctica or the Brazilian rainforest, which are important environmental issues and problems, but that was kind of it. That was my understanding of how we dealt with the environment. But I think you all understand, and I think people as a general matter understand now, this is not an abstraction. The problems of climate change are why it floods under, you know, 83 at North Avenue every time it rains now, or you know, the way we use land, the way we're redeveloping on space that had you know, old power plants and, you know, pollution on it. But these are, all these issues are connected. They're not abstract, and they're really important to you all, because honestly, the older we are, the less we're going to be the ones dealing with it, the consequences of it. So I'm just I have a lot of hope in progress because of the conversation, as Phil said, because of this mayor's administration and our national, you know, the Biden administration. I just think we're in the right place with the right people and having these right conversations. And it's no longer an abstraction. We understand it's about us, our everyday lives.
Our third question focuses on accountability and opportunities for student engagement. The question is, how can we hold ourselves and Baltimore City officials accountable for this work?
So I'm going to jump in on this one because I think there's a fabulous opportunity right now. Maryland's General Assembly happens every year between January and April. And we have, throughout Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and the state, elected representatives, delegates, and senators that represent us in Annapolis. And we have an opportunity and a responsibility, I believe, to make sure that our elected officials hear from us. And you don't have to be 18 to reach out to your senator or your delegate or your city council representative for that matter, to let them know what you care about, to let them know if there is a bill in front of their body that impacts you or your neighborhood or your environment. And so right now we have several environmental bills that are being heard in our state General Assembly. And I can highlight two that I think, you know, this group of students might be particularly impactful on. One is called the Climate Solutions Now Act that would commit our state to significant greenhouse gas reductions, but also provide money for things like tree planting and retooling our fleet vehicles for our cities and counties to be more electric vehicles, and looking at building energy savings. So things that we've talked about here today. That bill it's got a hearing in the House of Delegates next week. And because of COVID and everything being virtual, you can tune into that hearing and hear what's being said, the questions that are being asked. And you can reach out to your senator or representative and tell them what you think. And I think that's one of the greatest ways that we as residents can hold our leaders accountable, is by actually weighing in on the decisions that they're making every day on policies and rules that impact our lives, you know, for years to come.
I always remember something a friend used to say, which is that the world is run by the people who show up. And I think that's especially true in politics. And what it really means in this regard is show up. You know, if you're the ones like Jen was saying, who are contacting their representatives or testifying in the state legislature, you're going to run the world. If you're the ones holding this conversation, if you're the ones talking to people, I mean, we all, I'm sure, have heard the joke about Smaltimore. It really is small in terms of the leadership structure of the city. There's like 1,000 people who, if you talk to all of them, you could know and do anything in this city. It's not hard to contact your leaders and your legislators in City Hall, in Annapolis, and there are issues you can advocate for. And then there's direct volunteering you can do every day. And again, Sixth Branch is always grateful for volunteers from Friends School and other students from beyond. I know Blue Water hosts volunteers, and there are things you can show up and do yourself too. But that's my advice: is find the thing that you care about and show up for it.
Yeah, I like that a lot, Scott. I mean, just showing up. I think the other thing too, I would just say is your generation, make sure we aren't being left behind. And what I mean by that is, you know, the younger generation understands trends and know where the world is moving to, and make sure that our elected officials know where the world is moving. Let me give you an example, a case study. And Jim touched on it briefly about the electrification, vehicle electrification. EVs are the future. And make sure that if you don't see charging stations in your community, if you don't see them on the streets, that you are bringing that and raising and elevating that. The goal should be, we should have 1 out of every 4 vehicles should be an EV by 2030. But certain regions aren't going to move as quickly. Make sure Baltimore and our region doesn't get left behind from technology. The other is distributed generation. Pretty soon, I remember when I was young, I couldn't pick up one of these and call, right? So now that's the same thing that's going to happen in energy. You had to be plugged into a wall in order to talk on a phone. The same thing is going to happen with energy, where you're going to be able to generate your own energy, not beholden to the utility, store that energy on battery packs on your homes and in your businesses, and be able to use the energy how you see fit. Again, as students, these emerging technologies and opportunities, just make sure that you're bringing and elevating that to our elected officials, because sometimes we become a little antiquated, and we don't like to think we're old, but sometimes things get by us. So I would encourage you all to force us to make sure that we don't get left behind as a region.
Thank you for all of your thoughtful responses. We are now going to transition into the question and answer portion of the panel.
Okay, so our first question is asking the panelists to comment on the proposed amendment to the Maryland Constitution that would guarantee the right to a healthy environment. Would any of our panelists like to answer this question?
Yeah, I'd be happy to take that. So there is an effort among a whole coalition of organizations, and I'm proud to say that Blue Water Baltimore is a supporting organization that feels that we should amend our state constitution to ensure that every single resident of the state of Maryland has a right to clean air, clean water, and a clean environment. And that may sound fairly simple, but it is, it could result in difficulty doing some of the things that we do every day. And so we are seeing opposition from folks who, Scott mentioned that some folks that are doing redevelopment activities in the city may not always follow the rules about disposing of construction waste or bulk trash. Those kinds of folks could face stiffer penalties, fines, or even jail time for violating our right or our neighborhood's right to a clean environment, clean air, clean water. But we fundamentally at Blue Water Baltimore believe that everyone has a right to clean water, clean air, and a clean environment. And it's not a luxury that only can be enjoyed by a few. We really have to work toward ensuring that right for students, for folks who are low income, who are young, who are old. It really should be a right. And it's a little bit saddening to me that we have to look at amending our constitution to try to reinforce what we believe should be a basic fundamental right for anyone. So that legislation is moving through the Maryland General Assembly right now, and that could be something that if you chose, you could talk to your elected representative about.
Our second question is from Miss LeBron's 5th grade homeroom. They ask, what is energy affordability?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think energy affordability is really making sure that everyone is able to use energy in proportion to their incomes. And I think that's a little bit of the challenge. If someone is making, let's just use some numbers. If someone's making, say, $30,000 a year, but their energy expenses are totaling, something like $6,000 annually, they're using almost 20% of their income just to keep the lights on. That is a key opportunity for us in the United States, because what's happening is as more people go to renewable and solar, the infrastructure from the utility is still there, and everyone else who is still connected to the grid bear the burden and the cost that are associated with maintaining that infrastructure. So that is something that we need to make sure that we're keeping in mind when we talk about equity and affordability, that, there would be, in an ideal world, everyone would pay, as it relates to their income, a proportion of their income that was equal. But when you have some people paying 15 to 20% of their income just to keep the electricity and lights on, and others paying 2 to 3%, that is not energy affordability.
Thank you. Our next question is, how can we ensure that the companies and brands we use are eco-friendly?
I'll jump in on that one. I think it's really just, I would, right now there's a big push for, ESG. And so I would look at those brands and really support those brands. You guys you're at the age of social media. Promote those brands that are doing good by the environment. And I won't subscribe and tell you to do the cancel culture on those who are not, but encourage people to buy from those companies and firms that are really behind the environment. And I think you can utilize Instagram. I guess Facebook is old for old folks now, so I don't think you guys use Facebook anymore, but Instagram, TikTok, I'm trying to think what my sons use, TikTok, and some of those other social media channels and platforms to really encourage your friends and family to buy from those brands. I think that's the most impactful thing you all could do.
Yeah, I would just quickly add to Phil's comments that it's always worth doing your homework, because there are also, unfortunately, some companies that want to inflate how environmentally friendly they may actually be. They may have one line of products that is very environmentally friendly, but it represents only a small percentage of their income or the work that they do. And the other, say, 80 to 90% is much less environmentally friendly. And so I would encourage, always do your homework, and then, vote with your pocketbook, make choices based on your values.
And I'll add that it works, by the way. I mean, General Motors just announced they're going all electric by 2035. Right? This is General Motors, who is the core, the origin of what we think of as like the American gas guzzling super truck or whatever, and they're going all electric, and it's because of pressure and culture and changes in people's preferences. So it does work to make your, as Jen said, vote by your pocketbook. That has an effect on companies and what they do.
Our last question is, what is a land use policy and what are the policies for Baltimore?
I can jump in because, again, we sort of, in my organization, we sort of swim every day in land use policy, or the consequences of it. So, I mean, land use policy broadly addresses how we think of what we're doing with the land in the city. We have, zoning policy, which is incredibly detailed as to what you do with certain properties. But in a bigger picture, we're always making decisions. Our city is always making decisions as to where we're going to put certain types of property, how we're going to prioritize development in different places, and what we're doing with land. And I mean literally the land. Again, and the level at which we deal with it is what happens to the land after vacant properties are demolished. So this city has, when you lose 400,000 people over 70 years, we have a lot of vacant properties that have been demolished, and the list of properties remaining to demolish is always about 16,000. These are 16,000 imagined row house-sized properties that are still, in constant demolition, because as some come down, new ones become vacant. It's a constant cycle. And so what, again, where I deal with it, and I'm going to punt this to Jen and Phil in a second too, because I know Jen has a professional background in this, but what are we doing with all these properties and all this vacant space, and making sure that it doesn't just sit there, but instead becomes an asset, a green asset to each neighborhood that will help with a renaissance in those neighborhoods.
Yeah, I will add in that land use policy is also very long-term. And so many of the decisions that were made, 200 years ago in Baltimore City about how to use certain parcels of land or where to site an incinerator or a power plant or a landfill have long-term repercussions for how that land can be used even after that incinerator or that landfill or that polluting industry is gone. And so the legacy of some of these old policies, or more often lack thereof, are still being felt in many of our neighborhoods that are dealing with soil contamination or old waste from these decisions. And so we have to think about, when we are deciding now how to use land, how to permit certain activities, we have to be thinking toward the future and how this is going to impact the folks not only who live here now, but who live here, you know, down the road. And that is often a challenge where decision makers are often feeling very pressed to make decisions with very short-term benefits, say for a land developer or a property owner, without necessarily considering what are the long-term implications for those decisions we make today.
All right, I'd like to thank the audience for all the questions, and I'd like to thank the panelists for the answers. That's all the time we have for Q&A today.
As we close today's panel, we'd like to again say thank you to all of our amazing panelists, Jen Eosa, Phil Krosky, and Scott Goldman, for such an enlightening presentation on how to recognize and fight the impacts environmental racism posed on our city. For those of you who enjoyed the themes of today's presentation and are eager to further discuss environmental justice or want to help plan future events like these, we encourage you to check out our sustainability blog or email us at sustainability@friendsbalt.org. Information to collaborate with our team, including Mr. Mohammed, as well as more information on today's speakers, their work, and a recording of today's webinar will be available
Sounds like we lost Elle. She was just going to say that today's webinar will be available following this on our follow-up page, which is linked. So thank you.